The day my son was born was the happiest and most terrifying of my life. Happiest because after 9 months of carrying him beneath my heart, I finally held him in my arms. This perfect, tiny being with skin the color of polished mahogany and eyes that already seemed to hold wisdom beyond his minutes on this earth. Terrifying because I knew that in this world, on the Belle Fleur plantation in Louisiana, his life was not his own. Neither was mine. My name is Sarah. I was 24 years old in the spring of 1855 when my son drew his first breath in the cramped, airless cabin I shared with 3 other enslaved women. There was no midwife present, no doctor to ease my labor, only Aunt Josephine, an older woman who had delivered countless babies on the plantation, her gnarled hands gentle despite the arthritis that twisted her fingers. "He's strong, this one," she had whispered as she placed my son on my chest, his tiny body still slick with birth fluids. "You've got to be strong too, Sarah. For him." I named him Isaac after my father, who had been sold away when I was just a girl. I remembered little of him beyond his deep laugh and the stories he would tell me of Africa, of our ancestors who had been kings and queens before they were stolen away across the sea. Those stories had sustained me through years of bondage, and I hoped they would someday sustain my son as well. But fate, or rather, Master Edward Belle Fleur, had other plans. 3 days after Isaac's birth, as I lay in my pallet nursing him, the door to the cabin swung open. Mrs. Catherine Belle Fleur stood in the entrance, her tall figure silhouetted against the morning light. Behind her loomed the overseer, Mr. Jenkins, his face impassive beneath his wide-brimmed hat. "There she is," Mrs. Catherine said, her voice carrying that particular tone of studied indifference that the white folks used when discussing matters of business concerning us. "The doctor says she's healthy, and her milk is good and plentiful." My arms tightened instinctively around Isaac. I had heard rumors that Mrs. Catherine had given birth the previous week, but that the child wasn't feeding well, that she was unable to nurse him herself. I knew what that meant for a slave woman who had recently delivered, but I had prayed they would choose someone else. "Sarah," Mr. Jenkins said, stepping forward, "you're to come to the big house, right now." "Please," I whispered, looking from his stony face to Mrs. Catherine's cold eyes. "My baby is only 3 days old. He needs me." "Your child will be cared for," Mrs. Catherine replied dismissively. "My son requires a wet nurse, and you've been chosen for the honor. You should be grateful." Honor. As if it were a privilege to have my breasts claimed for her child while my own went hungry. As if I should feel thankful that my body, which had never been my own on this plantation, was now to be used in this most intimate of ways. "Now, Sarah," Mr. Jenkins repeated, his hand moving to the whip at his belt in silent warning. I knew then that I had no choice. With trembling hands, I passed Isaac to Aunt Josephine, who had been watching the exchange with resignation in her eyes. She had seen this before, many times. She knew, as I was beginning to understand, that resistance would only bring pain, not change. "I'll care for him," she promised me softly. "Go on now, before they get angry." Blinking back tears, I followed Mrs. Catherine and Mr. Jenkins out of the cabin, across the dusty yard, and toward the imposing white-columned house that dominated the landscape of Belle Fleur plantation. Each step felt like a betrayal of my son, but what choice did I have? The alternative was the whip, perhaps even separation from Isaac entirely if I was deemed troublesome. The big house, as we called it, was a world I knew only from the outside, or from brief forays to clean or deliver items. Now I was led through the grand entrance hall with its polished wood floors and up the sweeping staircase to the second floor. The opulence around me, the gleaming banisters, the ornate wallpaper, the crystal chandeliers, stood in stark contrast to the dirt-floored cabin where my own child lay. We entered a large, airy bedroom, decorated in shades of blue and cream. In the center stood an elaborate cradle, carved from dark wood and draped with delicate lace. From within came the fretful cries of an infant. "This is Charles," Mrs. Catherine said, moving to the cradle and lifting a small bundle wrapped in fine linen. "He refuses his bottle and has been losing weight. The doctor says he needs a wet nurse." She approached and placed the child in my arms with more care than she had shown in discussing my own son. Charles Belle Fleur was a pink-faced infant with a tuft of pale hair and blue eyes that squinted up at me in confusion. He was smaller than Isaac, despite being a week older, his limbs thin and his cries weak but insistent. "You'll feed him every 2 hours," Mrs. Catherine instructed. day and night. You'll sleep in the adjoining room so you can hear him when he wakes. You are not to leave this part of the house without permission." She paused, her eyes cold as she added, "And you will be examined daily to ensure you're eating properly and not doing anything to harm your milk supply." I nodded silently, the weight of these new chains settling around me. Physical shackles might not bind me, but my body was now tied to this room, to this white child, as surely as if I were locked in the plantation stocks. "You may feed your own child once a day," she continued, as if granting a great kindness. "In the evening, after Charles is settled, Jenny will bring him to you, once a day." My breasts already ached with milk meant for Isaac, and they expected me to feed him just once a day, while giving this white baby unlimited access? But again, what choice did I have? "Yes, Mrs.," I replied, lowering my eyes to hide the anger I knew would show there. "Good," she said, satisfied with my apparent submission. "Now feed Charles, he's been crying for hours." As she and Mr. Jenkins left the room, I sat in the rocking chair by the window and adjusted my dress to offer my breast to the Bellefleur air. His tiny mouth latched on hungrily, drawing milk that should have nourished my own son. Outside the window, I could see the slave cabins in the distance, tiny structures dwarfed by the massive oaks that lined the drive to the big house. Somewhere in one of those cabins, Isaac was crying for me, for the comfort and nourishment only I could provide. The thought made my eyes burn with tears I dared not shed. That evening, as promised, Jenny, one of the house slaves, brought Isaac to me. His small face was red from crying, his body tense with hunger and distress. I clutched him to me desperately, offering my breast, which he took with frantic need. "The mistress says you have 15 minutes, Jenny whispered apologetically, glancing nervously at the door. 15 minutes after a day of separation. 15 minutes to nurse my starving child, to hold him, to whisper my love into his perfect ear. It was a cruelty almost worse than complete separation. As Isaac suckled, I sang to him softly, a lullaby my mother had sung to me before she too was sold away. The words spoke of rivers carrying us home, of ancestors watching over us, of freedom that waited beyond the horizon. It was a dangerous song, one that could earn me the lash if overheard by white ears, but I needed my son to hear it, to know that we came from something greater than this plantation, than this bondage. All too soon, Jenny returned. "Time's up, Sarah," she said gently. "I have to take him back now." I pressed my lips to Isaac's forehead, inhaling his sweet scent, trying to memorize every detail of his perfect face. "I love you," I whispered. "Never forget that, no matter what happens. Your mama loves you." As Jenny took him from my arms, his cries resumed, heart-wrenching wails that echoed down the corridor long after they had disappeared from view. I pressed my hands against my mouth to stifle my own sobs, knowing that any display of excessive emotion would be reported to Mrs. Catherine and could result in even less time with my son. Days passed in this manner, bleeding into weeks. I lived in a strange limbo, physically comfortable in ways I had never experienced, sleeping on a real bed, eating better food than I had ever been given as a field hand, spending my days in the relative cool of the big house rather than under the punishing Louisiana sun. But my soul withered with each passing day, with each feeding of Charles Bellefleur, while my own son received only the leftover milk from my depleted breasts during our brief evening visits. Charles thrived under my care, growing plump and content. Mrs. Catherine was pleased, occasionally rewarding me with an extra 5 minutes with Isaac or a ribbon for my hair, as if these trinkets could possibly compensate for what had been taken from me. Master Edward, who had been away on business in New Orleans when I was first brought to the house, returned after a month. He came to the nursery to see his son, his tall figure imposing in the doorway as I rocked Charles after a feeding. "So this is the wet nurse," he said, addressing his wife rather than me. "She's keeping him well fed, I see." "Yes, Charles has gained almost 2 pounds, Mrs. Catherine replied proudly, as if she had somehow contributed to this achievement. "Sarah has proven quite suitable." Master Edward approached, looking down at me with a critical eye that made my skin crawl. Unlike his wife, who viewed me as little more than a convenient milk cow, something in his gaze suggested he saw me as a woman, a realization that filled me with dread rather than relief. "She's a pretty one," he commented, his eyes lingering on my face, then dropping to my breasts where Charles still rested. "Strong too, by the look of her. She has a child of her own," Mrs. Catherine said, a note of disapproval in her voice. "A boy, about Charles's age." "Is that so?" Master Edward replied, seeming amused. Well, that works out well for everyone, doesn't it? Her child needed feeding, and so did ours. Providence. The casualness with which he dismissed the pain of my separation from Isaac made something cold and hard form in the pit of my stomach. These people saw nothing wrong with what they were doing to us. In their eyes, it was simply the natural order of things. Their needs above ours, their children more valuable than ours. As the weeks turned to months, I noticed that Isaac was looking increasingly thin during our evening visits. His once plump cheeks had hollowed, and his eyes seemed too large for his small face. When I questioned Jenny about it, she reluctantly admitted that there wasn't always enough milk from the goat they were using to supplement his feeding. I give him what I can, she whispered, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. But there are other children to feed too, and the mistress doesn't concern herself much with slave babies. Desperation drove me to begin saving small portions of the rich food I was given, smuggling it back to my cabin, hidden in pockets sewn into my underskirts. I mashed soft vegetables and soaked bread in water, creating a gruel that Jenny could feed to Isaac when he couldn't get milk. It wasn't enough, but it was all I could do. My son was 5 months old when everything changed. I had just finished feeding Charles and laid him in his cradle for a nap when Mrs. Catherine entered the nursery, her face flushed with excitement. "Sarah, isn't it wonderful?" she exclaimed, an unusual animation in her typically controlled features. "Master Edward has made an excellent business arrangement with Mr. Thornton from the neighboring parish." I murmured some appropriate response, not understanding what this had to do with me, or why she would share business matters with a slave. "Mr. Thornton's sister has just had her first child, but sadly cannot produce milk," she continued. "He's offered a very generous sum for a healthy wet nurse." The blood froze in my veins as her meaning became clear. "You're selling me, Mrs." She laughed, the sound like breaking glass to my ears. "Oh no, Sarah. Charles still needs you, but your child, what's his name?" "Isaac. He'll be going to the Thornton plantation. Master Edward concluded the sale this morning." The world tilted beneath me. I gripped the edge of Charles's cradle to keep from falling, my knuckles white with the effort. "You sold my baby?" The words emerged as a whisper, though in my head I was screaming. "It's really the perfect solution," Mrs. Catherine continued, oblivious to or simply unconcerned with my distress. "Mr. Thornton gets a wet nurse for his sister's baby, and we receive $800. She smiled, pleased with the arrangement. "Of course you should be proud. That's quite a high price for an infant slave. Master Edward says it's because the child is healthy and has good bloodlines." Bloodlines. Like a horse or a hunting dog. My son, my beautiful Isaac, reduced to his potential for work and breeding. "When?" I managed to ask, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Mr. Thornton's overseer will collect the child tomorrow morning," she replied. "So you'll have tonight to say your goodbyes. I have arranged for you to have an extra half hour with him. See how considerate we are?" Considerate. The word echoed in my head like a mockery. They were tearing my child from me forever, and I was expected to be grateful for an extra 30 minutes. "Thank you, Mrs." I forced myself to say, the words like ash in my mouth. After she left, I stood motionless by the cradle, staring unseeingly at Charles, who slept peacefully, unaware that his comfort came at the expense of my child's very existence in my life. In that moment, something fundamental shifted within me. A breaking point reached and surpassed. The cold, hard thing that had been growing in my stomach since Master Edward's return spread throughout my body, reaching into every limb, every fingertip, behind my eyes, into the very core of my being. They had taken everything from me. My freedom, my body, my milk, and now my child. There was nothing left for them to claim, nothing left for me to lose. And in that terrible freedom, a plan began to form. That night, as I held Isaac for what would be the last time, I memorized every detail of him. The weight of his body in my arms, the scent of his skin, the way his fingers curled trustingly around mine. He was thin from months of insufficient nourishment, but still perfect, still my beautiful boy. I nursed him as long as I could, until Jenny came with apologetic eyes to take him away. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she whispered as she reached for him. "It ain't right, what they're doing." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. As I passed Isaac to her, I pressed my lips to his forehead, one final time. "Remember, my love," I murmured against his soft skin. "Your mama loves you. Always." He didn't cry as Jenny took him away. Perhaps he was too weak, or perhaps at 5 months he had already learned that crying didn't change anything in our world. The thought made my heart crack further, fueling the cold rage that had settled into my bones. After they left, I sat alone in the small room adjoining the nursery, staring at my hands. Hands that had cradled my child, hands that had nurtured the son of the man who had just sold my own. These same hands, I decided, would be instruments of justice. The plan that had begun forming in my mind took clearer shape as night deepened around the Bellefleur plantation. It was simple in its execution, but would require perfect timing and, more importantly, unwavering resolve on my part. Fortunately, I had nothing left to lose, which made me more dangerous than Master Edward could possibly imagine. I knew his habits well after months in his household. Every evening, he retired to his study after dinner for a glass, often several glasses, of fine Kentucky bourbon. It was a ritual he never missed, even when Mrs. Catherine complained about the smell of spirits on his breath when he eventually came to bed. The following night, after a day of mechanically tending to Charles while my mind replayed the morning scene, my son, my Isaac, being handed to a stranger and loaded into a wagon bound for a plantation I would never see, I waited until the house grew quiet. Charles had been fed and was sleeping soundly in his cradle. Mrs. Catherine had retired early with one of her frequent headaches. The house slaves had completed their evening duties and withdrawn to their quarters. Only Master Edward remained awake, as I knew he would be, ensconced in his study with his bourbon and account books. This was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I slipped from the nursery, moving silently through the darkened house. As a wet nurse, I had more freedom of movement than most slaves, particularly at night when Charles might need attention. No one would question my presence in the hallways, especially at an hour when most of the household was asleep. Master Edward's study door was ajar, a slice of warm lamplight spilling into the corridor. I paused, gathering my courage, then smoothed my dress and pinched my cheeks to bring color to them. Taking a deep breath, I knocked softly on the door frame. "Enter," came his voice, the words slightly slurred. He had been at the bourbon for some time then. I stepped into the room, my eyes downcast in the posture of subservience I had perfected over years of slavery. "Excuse me, Master Edward," I said softly. "I noticed your light was still on and thought you might want fresh water." He looked up from his ledgers, surprise registering on his face before it was replaced by something else, the same look I had seen when he first returned from New Orleans and assessed me in the nursery. "Sarah," he said, leaning back in his chair. What a thoughtful gesture. I moved to the side table where a pitcher and glass sat, pouring water as if that had truly been my purpose. I could feel his eyes on me, taking in the curve of my body beneath my simple dress. Though revulsion crawled along my skin, I forced myself to smile slightly, encouraging his interest. "How is my son faring?" he asked, watching as I placed the water glass near his hand. "He grows stronger every day, Master," I replied. "He has a healthy appetite." Edward chuckled, taking a sip of his bourbon. "As do I, Sarah, as do I." His eyes lingered on my breasts, making his meaning unmistakable. I lowered my gaze, feigning shyness rather than the disgust that threatened to show on my face. "Is there anything else you require, Master?" He considered me for a long moment, then gestured to the bourbon bottle. "Pour me another, would you?" I obliged, filling his glass higher than was customary. He raised an eyebrow but didn't object, taking a deep swallow of the amber liquid. "I understand your child left for the Thornton plantation today," he said casually, as if discussing the weather rather than the devastation of my life. "Yes, Master," I replied, keeping my voice neutral with effort. "It's the way of things, Sarah," he continued, his tone patronizing. "Business. You understand business, don't you?" "I understand what I'm told to understand, Master," I said, the perfect response of a seemingly compliant slave. He laughed, pleased by what he perceived as my acceptance of my place. "You're a sensible woman. That's good." He drained his glass and held it out for another refill. "Most women are too emotional, too attached to sentiment rather than sense." I poured more bourbon, wondering how many it would take before he was sufficiently impaired. "Master is very wise," I murmured, the words like poison on my tongue. The conversation continued in this vein for some time, Edward drinking steadily while expounding on his views about business, women, slaves, and his own cleverness. I played my role perfectly, appearing attentive and impressed while encouraging him to drink more. When he suggested I sample the bourbon myself, I took the smallest possible sip, before refilling his glass once again. After his fifth or perhaps sixth glass, his speech had grown notably slurred, and he was having difficulty focusing his eyes. It was time for the next phase of my plan. "Master Edward," I said, my voice deliberately soft and inviting, "it's getting very late. Perhaps you should retire." He blinked at me blearily. Yes, perhaps I should. He attempted to stand, swaying dangerously before gripping the edge of his desk for support. "Let me help you, Master," I offered, moving to his side and allowing him to lean on me. The feel of his arm around my waist, his body pressed against mine, made bile rise in my throat, but I swallowed it down. This was necessary. This was justice. We made our way slowly from the study and up the stairs, Edward leaning heavily on me with each step. Rather than turning toward the master bedroom where Catherine slept, I guided him toward a smaller guest chamber at the end of the hall. "Not my room," he mumbled, attempting to change direction. "The missus has a headache," I whispered conspiratorially. "I thought perhaps you might be more comfortable here tonight." He chuckled, his alcohol-soaked breath hot against my neck. Thoughtful Sarah, pretty Sarah. The guest room was seldom used, positioned far from both the master bedroom and the nursery where I slept. It was perfect for my purposes. I helped Edward to the bed where he collapsed heavily, his eyes already beginning to close as the bourbon did its work. "Let me make you comfortable, Master," I said, removing his shoes and loosening his cravat. He mumbled something incoherent, his eyelids drooping. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into the heavy rhythm of drunken sleep. I stood watching him for a long moment, ensuring he was truly unconscious. Then I set to work. From the pocket sewn into my dress, I withdrew the items I had carefully collected over the day. Strips of fabric torn from an old sheet, a small bottle of lamp oil I had pilfered from a storage closet, and a box of matches taken from the kitchen. I laid these on the bedside table, then turned my attention to Edward. Moving quickly and efficiently, I used the fabric strips to bind him to the bed, his wrists to the headboard, his ankles to the footboard. He stirred once during the process, but only to roll onto his back, making my task easier. The bonds were not elaborate. They didn't need to be. Their purpose was not to hold him indefinitely, but to slow him down, just long enough. When he was secured, I took the lamp oil and methodically poured it over the bed linens, the curtains, the rug beside the bed. The pungent smell filled the room, but I was not concerned. This wing of the house was empty, save for the unconscious man before me. I saved a small amount of the oil, which I used to create a trail from the bed to the door, my path of escape. Then I stood at the foot of the bed and looked one last time at Master Edward Bellefleur, the man who had seen my child as nothing more than merchandise to be sold, who had viewed my body as something to be used for his own purposes and profit. His eyes fluttered open suddenly, confusion giving way to alarm as he registered his bound limbs and the unfamiliar surroundings. "What? Sarah? What are you doing?" His voice was thick with lingering intoxication, but panic was rapidly clearing his mind. "Do you remember the price you got for my son, Master Edward?" I asked, my voice calm, conversational almost. $800. That was the value you placed on my child's life." He pulled against the restraints, his eyes widening as he caught the smell of the lamp oil. "Sarah, untie me right now. This is madness." "No, Master," I replied, striking a match and holding it before me, its small flame dancing in the darkness. "This is justice." "Guards!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. "Help! Someone help!" But no one could hear him in this isolated room with its thick walls and heavy door. No one would come to his aid, just as no one had come to mine when my son was taken from me. I began to sing then, the same lullaby I had sung to Isaac during our brief time together, about rivers and freedom and ancestors watching from beyond. The gentle melody filled the room, incongruous with the scene of a bound man on an oil-soaked bed. "Sarah, please," Edward begged, all pretense of authority gone now. "I'll get your son back. I'll pay any price. I'll free you both. Please." I continued singing, my voice never faltering as I dropped the match onto the oil-soaked carpet. Flames leapt up immediately, racing along the trail I had created toward the bed. I backed toward the door, still singing as fire climbed the bedposts and caught the curtains. Edward's pleas turned to screams, but I did not stop singing. Not when the flames reached his clothes, not when the smoke began to thicken the air, not when his cries changed from words to animal sounds of pain and terror. I closed the door on the inferno I had created and made my way swiftly through the dark house. By the time anyone smelled the smoke or heard the distant screams, I would be gone, into the night, into the unknown future that awaited a slave who had committed the ultimate transgression against her master. As I slipped out a side entrance and into the Louisiana night, the lullaby still on my lips, I felt no remorse, no hesitation, no fear. There was only the cold certainty that I had done what was necessary. My son had been taken from me, so I had taken something of equal value from Edward Bellefleur: his life, his future, his final moments of dignity. An eye for an eye, a child for a life, a mother's vengeance served with fire and song. The plantation was still quiet as I fled into the night, the fire in the guest wing yet to be discovered. I had perhaps 20 minutes, maybe less, before the alarm would be raised and chaos would erupt. 20 minutes to put as much distance as possible between myself and Bellefleur plantation. I had planned my escape route carefully during the long days of nursing Charles while grieving for Isaac. The Bellefleur property bordered the vast Atchafalaya swamp to the west, a forbidding wilderness of cypress trees, black water, and labyrinthine bayous that few white men dared to enter. Legends spoke of runaway slaves who had formed hidden communities deep within the swamp, of Choctaw Indians who knew the secret paths through the treacherous terrain, of ghosts and monsters that haunted the misty waters. I knew which legends were designed to frighten slaves away from escape and which held kernels of truth. My mother, before she was sold away, had whispered stories of the Maroons, communities of escaped slaves who lived free in the most inaccessible parts of the swamp. Whether these settlements still existed, I couldn't be certain, but the swamp offered my only chance of evading the slave catchers, who would surely be dispatched with their dogs once my crime was discovered. I ran across the open fields behind the slave quarters, keeping low and using the rows of sugarcane for cover. The night was moonless, the darkness a blessing that hid my fleeing figure from any watchful eyes. The air was heavy with humidity, pressing against my skin like a damp cloth, but I welcomed its concealing embrace. At the edge of the cleared land, I paused to catch my breath and look back at the big house. A faint orange glow was now visible in one wing. The fire had taken hold, but had not yet spread to the main structure. Soon, someone would raise the alarm. Soon, the night would be filled with shouts and the frantic efforts to save the Bellefleur mansion from the flames I had ignited. I turned away and plunged into the swamp. The transition from plantation to wilderness was abrupt. One moment I was in the ordered world of human cultivation, the next surrounded by primordial chaos. Massive cypress trees rising like ancient sentinels from the black water, their knees breaking the surface like bony fingers reaching for air. Spanish moss hung in ghostly curtains from every branch, creating an eerie canopy that filtered what little starlight penetrated the clouded sky. I had no lantern, no torch to light my way. Such items would have been impossible to obtain without arousing suspicion. Instead, I moved carefully, feeling my path more than seeing it, using all my senses to navigate the treacherous terrain. The ground beneath my feet was sometimes solid, sometimes deceptively thin, a crust of vegetation over pockets of sucking mud. More than once I sank ankle-deep before finding firmer footing. The sounds of the swamp enveloped me, the chorus of frogs and insects, the occasional splash of something moving through water, the whisper of wind through the cypress branches overhead. These natural noises would help mask my passage, but they also obscured any sounds of pursuit that might be closing in behind me. As I pushed deeper into the wilderness, following what appeared to be a slightly raised path through the murky shallows, my thoughts turned to Isaac. Was he alive? Was he being cared for at the Thornton plantation? Did the woman who now nursed him sing to him as I had? Did she hold him close and whisper words of comfort when he cried? I would never know the answers to these questions. My son was lost to me forever, sold away by the man whose charred remains would soon be discovered in the ashes of the guest bedroom. The thought should have brought satisfaction, perhaps even joy, but I felt only a hollow emptiness where those emotions should have been. The fire I had set had not been an act of passion, but of cold calculation, the methodical elimination of a man who had destroyed my life and who would have continued to do so had I not stopped him. It was not revenge, but justice, swift and final, in a world where justice for people like me did not exist through any legal means. I had been walking for perhaps an hour when I heard it, the distant baying of hounds cutting through the night. The alarm had been raised, and the slave catchers had wasted no time in beginning their hunt. They must have discovered Master Edward's body, understood immediately that this was no accident, but a deliberate act of murder. And who would be the prime suspect but the slave whose child had been sold away just that morning? Fear, which had been surprisingly absent during my calculated murder of Edward Bellefleur, now surged through me. I quickened my pace, no longer able to move as carefully as before. My foot caught on a submerged root, sending me sprawling into the shallow water with a splash that seemed deafening in the relative quiet of the swamp. I scrambled to my feet, now soaked and covered in mud, and pushed forward with renewed desperation. The dogs would follow my scent easily enough on land, but water might confuse them. I needed to find deeper water, a bayou or channel I could wade through to break the trail. As if in answer to my unspoken prayer, the path I followed opened into a wider waterway, a sluggish channel perhaps 20 feet across, its surface black and still in the darkness. Without hesitation, I waded in, gasping as the cool water rose to my waist, then my chest as I moved toward the center. The bottom was soft mud that sucked at my feet with each step, threatening to hold me fast if I remained in one place too long. I pushed forward, using my arms to pull myself through the deeper sections, always aware of the distant but steadily approaching sound of the hounds. Halfway across, something moved in the water near me, a heavy, sinuous shape that displaced the water in an ominous ripple. Alligator. The swamp was full of them, massive, ancient creatures that could take down a deer or a human with equal ease. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, as the ripple moved past me and disappeared into the darkness ahead. The baying of the hounds grew louder. I couldn't afford to wait any longer, alligator or no alligator. I continued across the channel, finally reaching the opposite bank and pulling myself out of the water onto a relatively dry hummock of land. From this vantage point, I could just make out the lights of lanterns moving through the trees on the side of the waterway I had left behind. The slave catchers, closing in with their dogs. I pressed myself flat against the earth, hardly daring to breathe as the lights drew closer to the channel. Voices carried across the water, harsh and determined. "The dogs say she came this way," one man called. "Must have gone into the water." "Damn it," another replied. "We'll lose the scent if she crossed. These hounds can't track through water." There was a pause, filled only with the whining of the dogs as they paced along the bank, confused by the vanished trail. "We'll split up," decided the first voice, clearly the leader of the hunting party. "Simmons, you and Parker take 3 men and follow the bank downstream. Me and the rest will go upstream. She has to come out somewhere, and when she does, the dogs will pick up her scent again." Murmurs of agreement followed, then the lights separated, moving in opposite directions along the far bank. I remained motionless until they had disappeared from view, the sounds of their passage fading into the ambient noises of the swamp. Only then did I allow myself to breathe normally, to consider my next move. The slave catchers would eventually find a place to cross the channel, would continue their search on this side. I needed to keep moving, to put more distance between us before dawn broke, and gave them the advantage of daylight. Rising cautiously to my feet, I oriented myself by the stars that occasionally peeked through gaps in the cypress canopy. I needed to continue west, deeper into the swamp where the terrain grew increasingly difficult, and where, if the stories were true, I might find others like myself, runaways who had carved out a precarious freedom in this forbidding wilderness. The going was slower now, my sodden dress heavy and clinging to my legs with each step. Hunger gnawed at my stomach. I had been unable to bring any food with me, as access to the kitchen was closely monitored, and any unusual requests would have aroused suspicion. Thirst was not a problem. The swamp was nothing if not wet, though I was hesitant to drink from the stagnant pools. Instead, I caught rainwater that had collected in the broad leaves of the palmetto plants that grew in drier areas. As night gradually gave way to the grey light of dawn, I found myself in a strange, otherworldly landscape. The cypress trees here were enormous, their massive trunks rising from the black water like the columns of some primordial cathedral. The spaces between them were wider, forming a series of interconnected pools and channels that required wading or swimming to cross. It was beautiful in its alien way, but also treacherous. The water was deeper here, and what lurked beneath its surface was invisible to my wary eyes. I was exhausted, having been awake for over 24 hours and in constant motion for much of that time. My limbs felt leaden, my mind foggy with fatigue. I needed to rest, but where? Every hummock of land seemed too exposed, every hollow too damp or already occupied by the swamp's natural inhabitants, snakes, lizards, and other creatures I had no desire to disturb. Finally, I spotted what appeared to be a suitable shelter, a massive fallen cypress, its trunk partially hollowed by rot and elevated just enough above the water to provide relatively dry refuge. I approached cautiously, alert for any signs that the hollow might already be home to an alligator or other predator. Finding it unoccupied, I crawled inside, the damp wood a luxury compared to the alternatives. From this hidden vantage point, I could see a small clearing and a section of open water, while remaining virtually invisible to anyone passing by. It would do for a brief rest, though I dared not allow myself to fully sleep. The slave catchers would still be searching, possibly closer than I knew. As I huddled in my temporary sanctuary, the events of the past day replayed in my mind with a strange detachment, as though they had happened to someone else. The morning discovery that Isaac had been sold, the long hours of nursing Charles while plotting Edward's death, the careful execution of my plan, from the bourbon to the lamp oil, to the final match that had sealed his fate. The flight into the swamp, pursued by men and dogs intent on capturing me for the inevitable public execution that awaited a slave who had murdered her master. It should have overwhelmed me, the enormity of what I had done, the desperate situation in which I now found myself. Yet I felt oddly calm, almost peaceful. I had acted as I needed to act. I had claimed the only justice available to me in a world that denied my humanity, that had taken my child, and expected me to continue serving without complaint or resistance. A sound pulled me from my thoughts, a soft splash that didn't match the natural rhythms of the swamp. I froze, pressing myself deeper into the hollow of the fallen tree, my heart pounding so loudly I feared it might be heard. Through a small gap in the rotted wood, I peered out at the clearing. For several long moments I saw nothing unusual, just the dappled morning light playing across the black water. Then a figure emerged from between the trees on the far side, a man moving with the quiet confidence of someone familiar with the swamp's dangers. He was not one of the slave catchers. Those men had been white, dressed in the rough clothing of overseers and field bosses. This man was black, tall and lean, his skin the deep brown of strong coffee. He wore simple homespun trousers and shirt, much patched but serviceable, and carried a crude spear in one hand, a string of fish in the other. I remained perfectly still, uncertain whether this stranger represented help or a different kind of danger. Runaway slaves sometimes returned escaped others to their masters for rewards, their desperate circumstances forcing them to betray their own people. The man paused at the edge of the clearing, his head tilting slightly as though listening. Had he heard my breathing? Sensed my presence somehow? I held my breath, willing him to move on, to continue his fishing elsewhere. Instead, he spoke, his voice carrying clearly across the small expanse of water. "I know you're there," he said calmly. "Been watching you since you crossed the deep channel about an hour ago." Still, I didn't move or respond. This could be a trick, a way to flush me out. "Slave catchers about 2 miles east," he continued conversationally, as though discussing the weather. "They lost your trail at the channel, but they'll circle around eventually. You can't stay here." His knowledge of my situation suggested he had been following me for some time, observing my flight from the plantation. But why? And how had he remained unseen? "I ain't gonna hurt you," he added when I still didn't emerge. "Ain't gonna turn you in neither. I've been free in these swamps for 8 years. Name's Gabriel." Something in his tone, a certain weariness combined with quiet dignity, convinced me to take the risk. Slowly, I crawled from my hiding place, wincing as my stiff muscles protested the movement. I stood unsteadily, facing him across the water, ready to flee if necessary. "Sarah," I offered, my voice rough from disuse and thirst. "From Bellefleur Plantation." Gabriel nodded, unsurprised. "Word travels fast, even in the swamp. They're saying you killed your master, burned him in his bed." I didn't confirm or deny this, but something in my expression must have answered his unspoken question. "Must have had your reasons," he said simply, with neither judgment nor approval in his tone. "But it means they won't stop looking for you, not ever. Not until they find you or your body." I know. The knowledge had been with me from the moment I struck the match. There would be no statute of limitations on my crime, no eventual forgiveness or forgetting. I would be hunted for the rest of my life. Gabriel studied me for a long moment, seeming to weigh some internal decision. Then he gestured with his spear. "There's a settlement about half a day's journey from here, people like us runaways. It ain't much, but it's safer than being alone out here. Hope, an emotion I had thought burned away in the fire that consumed Edward Belfleur, flickered tentatively to life. The Maroons, they're real. Real enough, he confirmed with a slight smile. Though not as many as there once was. Slave catchers find one of our camps every few years, but we rebuild, move deeper in, survive. Survive. The word resonated within me. Wasn't that what I had been doing my entire life? Surviving the separation from my mother, the daily indignities of slavery, the theft of my child, the exploitation of my body. I had survived it all, and now I had done more than survive. I had acted, had claimed a terrible agency in a world that denied me any legitimate power. I'll take you there, Gabriel offered, if you want to come. But we need to move now. Dawn's fully here, and the catchers will be expanding their search. I hesitated only briefly. What choice did I really have? Alone, with no knowledge of the swamp's secrets, no supplies, no weapons, my chances of long-term survival were slim. With Gabriel and his settlement of Maroons, I might have a future, limited and hidden, but a future nonetheless. Lead the way, I said. Gabriel nodded and motioned for me to join him on his side of the clearing. I waded across, the water chest-deep in places, emerging to stand beside him. Up close I could see the scars on his forearms and the back of his neck, the unmistakable marks of the lash, signs of a fellow survivor of slavery's brutality. Stay close, he instructed. Step where I step. Touch nothing I don't touch first. The swamp has ways of killing the unwary. For hours we moved through the increasingly wild terrain, Gabriel setting a pace that challenged my exhausted body, but never quite broke me. He seemed to know the swamp intimately, navigating by signs I couldn't perceive. Subtle changes in vegetation, the angle of the sun filtering through the canopy, marks on trees that might have been natural or might have been left by human hands as trail markers. We spoke little during this journey. Gabriel occasionally pointed out dangers. A water moccasin coiled on a half-submerged log, a patch of deceptively solid-looking ground that was actually a bog that could swallow a person whole, the distinctive tracks of an alligator on a muddy bank. I listened and observed, storing away this knowledge that might mean the difference between life and death in my new world. By midday, the character of the swamp began to change subtly. The water grew clearer, suggesting we were approaching a source of flowing water, rather than the stagnant pools we had been traversing. The vegetation became more varied, with flowering plants adding splashes of color to the predominant greens and browns. And the wildlife seemed more abundant, birds calling from the trees, small mammals rustling through the underbrush, fish visibly swimming in the streams we crossed. "We're getting close," Gabriel confirmed when he noticed my questioning glance at a particularly vibrant cluster of orchids growing on a cypress trunk. "Our settlement is near a spring, clean water, good for drinking, washing, fishing." The thought of clean water, of washing away the mud and sweat of my desperate flight, was almost painfully enticing. I realized I had been existing in a state of numb shock since fleeing the plantation. My mind focused solely on escape and survival. Now, with the immediate danger receding and the prospect of sanctuary ahead, my body was beginning to remind me of its needs: thirst, hunger, rest, cleanliness. We rounded a bend in what had become a definite stream bed, and Gabriel held up a hand, signaling me to stop. He gave a distinctive whistle, 3 notes rising in pitch, followed by 2 short, lower notes. A moment passed, then an answering whistle came from the dense vegetation ahead, the same pattern in reverse. "All clear," Gabriel explained, resuming his forward movement. "Sentries watch all approaches to the settlement. Gotta be careful." 100 yards further, the trees opened into a clearing about an acre in size. At its center stood a collection of small structures, not quite cabins but more substantial than lean-tos, built of cypress wood and roofed with palmetto fronds. A spring bubbled up from the ground at one end of the clearing, forming a small pool before flowing away, as the stream we had been following in reverse. Around the structures, people moved about in the daily activities of survival, tending small garden patches, mending fishing nets, smoking meat over low fires. They paused in their work as we emerged from the trees, regarding me with the wary assessment of those accustomed to danger. I counted perhaps 20 individuals, men, women, and a few children of various ages, all black, all with the watchful eyes and deliberate movements of those who had known bondage and now lived in the permanent shadow of recapture. "Found her near the deep channel," Gabriel announced to the group at large. "Running from Bellefleur Plantation. Name's Sarah." An older woman approached, her hair streaked with grey, her face lined with years, but her posture still straight and strong. "I'm Queen," she said, her voice carrying the lilt of the Caribbean. "This is my settlement. Gabriel vouches for you." "She killed her master," Gabriel replied, before I could speak. "Burned him in his bed. They're hunting her hard." A murmur ran through the assembled group. Not shock or horror, but something closer to grudging respect mixed with concern. Queen's eyes narrowed as she studied me more intently. "Why?" she asked, the single word demanding complete honesty. "He sold my baby," I answered, my voice steady despite the pain the words still evoked. "I was his son's wet nurse. My milk was good enough for his child, but my own son was just property to be sold." Queen nodded slowly, understanding and shared pain in her expression. "We've all lost children," she said, gesturing to encompass the entire settlement. "Husbands, wives, parents. That's the story of our people." She paused, then added with grim satisfaction, "Few of us get the chance to make them pay as you did." She turned to the others. "Sarah stays. She's one of us now. Delia, find her some clean clothes. Mary, prepare food. Joseph, add her to the watch rotation once she's rested." Her tone made it clear these were not requests but commands, and the named individuals moved immediately to comply. "The slavers will keep searching," a tall man objected, his face concerned rather than hostile. "They'll bring more men, more dogs. They always do for a killer." "Then we'll move deeper in," Queen replied firmly, "as we've done before, but we don't turn away our own." She fixed him with a stern look. "Would you have us return her, Thomas? Would you send her back to be burned alive or hanged, just to buy ourselves a few more months of peace?" Thomas shook his head, properly chastened. "No, Queen. You're right, as always." The matter settled, the group dispersed back to their tasks, though many cast curious glances my way. Queen turned back to me, her expression softening slightly. "Rest first," she said. "Eat. Clean yourself. Then we'll talk more about what skills you bring to our community." I nodded gratefully, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that I had found refuge, however temporary or precarious it might be. These people, these Maroons, understood what I had done and why I had done it. They would not judge me for claiming the only justice available to me, for valuing my child's life more than my master's. As Delia led me to one of the small huts and showed me where I could wash in a private section of the stream, I felt the tension that had sustained me through the past 24 hours begin to ebb. In its place came bone-deep exhaustion, but also something else. The first tentative tendrils of a feeling I had thought forever lost to me, not happiness. It was too soon for that. The wound of losing Isaac still too raw, the danger of my situation still too present, but perhaps something like peace. A momentary respite in which I could grieve properly for my son, could process the enormity of what I had done and what lay ahead. I had killed a man. I had escaped slavery. I had found others like myself who lived free, however marginally, in the heart of the swamp. I had survived. And for now, for this moment, that was enough. 1 year later, the Louisiana summer pressed down upon the swamp with its familiar weight, a blanket of heat and humidity that made every movement an effort, every breath a conscious act. I wiped sweat from my brow as I knelt beside our small garden patch, carefully harvesting the herbs I had planted in the spring. My fingers moved with practiced efficiency, selecting the mature plants and leaving the younger ones to grow. "Sarah," a voice called softly, "boat coming." I looked up to see Lily, a girl of perhaps 12 who had escaped from a plantation near Baton Rouge with her mother the previous winter. She stood at the edge of the clearing, her expression serious beyond her years. "Gabriel's?" I asked, already rising and dusting the soil from my hands. She shook her head. "Stranger. Thomas is bringing them in. A stranger." The word sent a ripple of tension through our small community. Strangers were rare and almost always brought change, sometimes good, in the form of new members for our settlement, sometimes devastating, as when slave catchers discovered one of our camps and we were forced to flee deeper into the swamp. I followed Lily to the central area of the settlement, where others were already gathering. Queen stood waiting, her face impassive, but her body alert, ready to give orders for evacuation if necessary. Gabriel and Joseph flanked her, both holding the crude but effective spears that were our primary weapons. Thomas emerged from the tree line, guiding a small flatboat through the shallow water that bordered our clearing. Behind him sat a man I didn't recognize, black, middle-aged, dressed in the rough clothing of a field hand rather than the better quality garments that might indicate a free black from the north. Found him near the East Channel, Thomas explained as he beached the boat. Says he's looking for the settlement. Says he has news. The stranger stood cautiously, his hands visible to show he carried no weapons. My name is Elijah, he said, his voice carrying the distinctive cadence of the Carolina coast. I've come from Charleston with word that might interest you. Queen gestured for him to step ashore but maintained a safe distance. What word would that be? About the Bellefleur plantation, Elijah replied, his eyes scanning our group until they settled on me. And about the slave woman who burned Master Edward in his bed a year ago. My heart stuttered in my chest. After a year of relative safety, had my past finally caught up with me? I stepped forward, meeting his gaze directly. I'm Sarah, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. What news do you bring? Elijah studied me with open curiosity. So it's true, he murmured, almost to himself. When I heard the stories, I thought they must be exaggerated. What stories? Queen demanded, her patience visibly thinning. They're telling your tale up and down the river, Elijah explained, turning back to me. From New Orleans to Natchez, from Baton Rouge to Charleston. The slave woman who took vengeance for her stolen child, who sang a lullaby while her master burned. I blinked in surprise. I had assumed my act would be recorded as just another slave rebellion, perhaps used to frighten other slaves, with the severe punishment that would follow such transgressions. I hadn't expected it to become a story passed among our people. The lullaby, Elijah continued. They say you sang to him the same song you used to sing to your baby. Is that true? Yes, I admitted softly, remembering that terrible night, the flames reflecting in Edward Bellefleur's terrified eyes, as I sang the song of rivers and freedom that had been my gift to Isaac. It seemed fitting. Elijah nodded, satisfaction in his expression. That's how they tell it. They say you bound him to his bed with strips torn from your own dress, that you poured lamp oil over him and struck the match yourself, that you never stopped singing even as he screamed for mercy. The accuracy of his description was unsettling. How had such details spread? Who had pieced together the truth of that night? The house had been asleep, the wing isolated. No one should have known exactly what transpired between Master Edward and me before the fire consumed the evidence. The overseers tried to keep it quiet, Elijah continued, as if reading my thoughts. Didn't want other slaves getting ideas. But secrets like that don't keep on a plantation. Someone always knows something, sees something, hears something. And now it's a story, I said, still processing this unexpected development. More than a story, Elijah corrected. It's a legend, a warning to masters who think they can take everything from us without consequence. And a reminder to our people that sometimes justice comes from our own hands when it comes at all. Queen, who had been listening intently, finally spoke. This is why you traveled from Charleston? To confirm a legend? Elijah shook his head. No, I came because I have news about the boy. For a moment I didn't understand his meaning. Then comprehension struck like lightning, and I swayed on my feet, steadied by Gabriel's hand on my arm. Isaac, I whispered, hardly daring to hope. You have news of my son? He lives, Elijah confirmed gently, on the Thornton plantation near Baton Rouge. The master's sister raised him as her son's companion. They're about the same age. He's healthy, from what my contacts tell me. Well treated, as such things go. Tears filled my eyes, the first I had allowed myself since the night I fled the Bellefleur plantation. My son was alive, not free, but alive and not suffering the worst cruelties of slavery. It was more than I had dared to hope during the long year of my exile. There's more, Elijah added, his voice taking on a different tone. The Bellefleur plantation is gone, burned to the ground 3 months ago. A murmur ran through our gathered community. The whole plantation? Queen asked, surprise evident in her usually controlled voice. Everything, Elijah confirmed. The main house, the outbuildings, the slave quarters, the fields. They say it started in the kitchens, but the summer had been dry and the wind was high, nothing could be saved. And the people? I asked, thinking of Jenny, who had brought Isaac to me each evening, of Aunt Josephine, who had delivered my son, of the other slaves who had shared my bondage. Most escaped in the chaos, Elijah replied. Some headed north toward the Free States. Others disappeared into the swamps. He paused, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "There are rumors that it wasn't an accident, that someone remembered what you did, Sarah, and decided to finish what you started." I closed my eyes briefly, imagining the Bellefleur plantation consumed by flames, the same fire that had taken Edward now claiming his legacy, erasing his family's claim to the land and the people they had owned. There was a symmetry to it that satisfied something deep within me. "Mistress Catherine?" I asked, thinking of the woman who had taken my milk for her son while denying it to mine. "And Charles?" "Survived," Elijah said. "They were visiting relatives in New Orleans when the fire occurred. But they're ruined. The plantation was heavily mortgaged after Edward's death, the insurance disputed because of the circumstances. They're living on the charity of family now, their former glory gone. It wasn't death, but for someone like Catherine Bellefleur, the loss of status and wealth might be a punishment almost as severe." The knowledge settled in me like a warm stone, not quite happiness, but a certain grim satisfaction. Queen turned to me, her eyes thoughtful. "Your son is in Baton Rouge," she said, making it a statement rather than a question. I nodded, already understanding what she was asking. "Yes, that's dangerous territory," she continued. "Too close to populated areas. Too many patrols." "I know," I acknowledged. The Thornton plantation was far from our hidden settlement, in an area where slave catchers regularly hunted for runaways. Attempting to reach it would mean risking not just my own recapture, but potentially leading enemies back to the maroon community that had given me sanctuary. Queen studied me for a long moment, reading the conflict in my eyes. "You want to go to him," she said finally. "He's my son," I replied simply. What more was there to say? Despite the year that had passed, despite the new life I had built among the Maroons, the ache of losing Isaac had never diminished. The news that he lived, that he was so relatively near, awakened the fierce maternal hunger that had driven me to murder and flight. Queen sighed, then nodded once decisively. "We'll help you," she said. "Not to bring him here. That would endanger us all. But to see him. Perhaps to let him know his mother lives and hasn't forgotten him." Hope, dangerous and bright, flared within me. "When?" "The autumn," she replied. "When the nights grow longer and the slave patrols less frequent. Gabriel knows the waterways near Baton Rouge. He can guide you." Gabriel, standing nearby, nodded his agreement. Over the past year, he had become a friend, perhaps something more, though neither of us had put words to the tentative bond that had formed between us. He, more than anyone, understood what drove me. "Until then," Queen continued, "you prepare. Learn every route, every hiding place. Plan for every contingency." Her voice softened slightly. "And accept that you may only be able to see him from a distance, that it may not be safe to make your presence known." I nodded, accepting this harsh reality. Even a glimpse of Isaac would be more than I had dared hope for during the long months of my exile. To know he was truly well, to perhaps hear his voice, to see how he had grown, these would be gifts beyond measure. "Thank you," I said to Elijah, who had watched this exchange with respectful silence, "for bringing this news." He inclined his head. "Your story gave hope to many who had none," he replied. "It seemed right that you should have some hope returned to you." As the group dispersed, returning to their tasks now that the stranger had proven to be a friend rather than a threat, I walked to the edge of our clearing and looked east, toward Baton Rouge, toward Isaac. The distance seemed both impossible and insignificant. Whatever obstacles lay between us, whatever dangers lurked along the way, I would find a path to my son. I had survived slavery. I had taken revenge on the man who stole my child. I had escaped through swamps patrolled by slave catchers and their dogs. I had found a community of fellow runaways who understood what freedom meant and what it cost. These were not the accomplishments of a woman who would be deterred by difficulty or danger. These were the acts of a mother who would stop at nothing to reclaim what had been taken from her, if not physically, then at least in the knowledge that she had tried, that she had never forgotten or abandoned her child. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across our hidden settlement, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The future remained uncertain, the path forward fraught with peril. But for the first time since that terrible day when I learned Isaac had been sold, I had purpose beyond mere survival, hope beyond simple vengeance. My son lived, and so did I. Against all odds, despite all that had been done to break us, we both endured. That knowledge was a flame that would sustain me through whatever challenges lay ahead, a fire not of destruction, but of resilience, burning steady and true in the darkness of our world. This was the story of Sarah of Louisiana, whose act of vengeance against the master who sold her child became legendary among enslaved communities throughout the South. Historical records are fragmentary, but oral traditions suggest that Sarah did indeed reach the Thornton plantation in late 1856, where she was able to glimpse her son from afar but could not safely approach him. Some accounts claim she left a carved wooden token where he would find it, a small bird in flight, a symbol of the freedom she had claimed and hoped he would someday know as well. Sarah returned to the Maroon settlement in the Atchafalaya swamp, where she lived until Union forces penetrated Louisiana during the Civil War. In 1863, she and several other members of the settlement made contact with federal troops and provided valuable intelligence about Confederate movements in the region. After the war, some records indicate a Sarah, formerly of Bellefleur, registered as a freedwoman in New Orleans, where she worked as a midwife and herbalist. Whether she was ever reunited with her son remains unknown. The Thornton family records show that a young enslaved man named Isaac was among those who fled the plantation during the chaos of the Union advance, but his subsequent fate is not recorded. The legend of the Singing Avenger, as Sarah came to be known in slave narratives, persisted well into the 20th century, a reminder of one woman's refusal to accept the theft of her child without exacting a terrible price from those responsible. The echoes of Sarah's fiery vengeance resonate through time, a stark reminder of a mother's love, transformed into righteous fury by an unforgivable injustice. If these untold stories of defiance and survival stir your soul, join our community. Subscribe to Hidden American Histories to uncover more powerful narratives from the shadows of American slavery. Your support helps us keep these powerful narratives alive.